Shirley, Mark and Sarah, Tim and Mia, Steve, kids, and grandkids of Bob Bartel. Good afternoon, my name is David Iglesias, and it's my honor to share some thoughts and remembrances about Bob. I first got to know him in the 1970s when I was a Wheaton College student and he was the chair of the economics department. When I think back to when I first met Bob, one word emerges from the thicket of my memory: joy. He was about the most joyful person I had ever met, and now looking back 40 years, I can still say that. I didn't know what to think about economics as a history major. It seemed to me to be the dismal scientist that critics still call it. To me, it was the incomprehensible science of graphs and charts and numbers. The term voodoo economics had not yet been invented, but that pretty much summed up my thoughts as an undergraduate. And through it all, Bob was not the dismal scientist, nor was he the voodoo economist. He was always up, full of joy. After hearing a lot of buzz as an undergrad about this International Study Program, or ISP, I decided to join him and Shirley and Chuck and Jean Henry in Holland for 8 weeks of study, 2 weeks of travel, and 1 free week. It was to become the most significant summer of my life. I can't thank Bob enough for having a vision to do that. This was in the late 1970s, 1978 to be precise, before the European Union, before the fall of the Soviet Union, before the unsettling phenomenon of the helicopter parent. I took his classes, and lo and behold, I actually understood what he was talking about. He was a masterful teacher who seemed to always have a smile on his face. He also seemed to have an enormous network, which allowed world-class speakers to come and guest lecture in his class. That summer was one of the most important summers of my life, in which my frame of reference went from region to global. I've never looked back, and I can thank Bob for this transformation. And I've heard other ISP students say exactly the same thing. I talked to him about going to law school, and he was positive and supportive, and suggested even that I consider his alma mater of the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. I couldn't have dreamed that some 34 years later I returned to Wheaton College and reconnected with the happy master of economics. I was privileged to visit Bob and Shirley often since I returned to Wheaton in 2014. In a strange quirk, I ended up heading up Wheaton's Center for Faith, Politics, and Economics. I heard that when Bob heard this news of my selection, he hooted for joy. So typical. Wow, a joyful economist. What a paradigm-shifting and challenging idea. I currently lead an international study program that is a direct descendant of the program that he and Shirley founded in 1970. I asked advice on how to lead such a program of college students to he and Shirley, and they gave me some terrific advice, and it was this: have devotionals led daily by students. Bob said it would calm the students down. I did it, and I observed the same thing. I like to joke around with Bob because he was a raconteur himself. I told him he owed me a car because I had to sell my car to afford tuition for his study program. One day, a few weeks later, I visited him. He asked me to hold out my empty hand. I was suspicious, but I complied. And his gift was 2 model cars. He said, "Now we're even. You have 2 cars for 1." And that exemplified the joie de vivre, or the joy of life that he had. One final story. Last week I was speaking with a young professor at the Citadel University in South Carolina. His resume listed him being an assistant to Sir Patrick Duffy, a 98-year-old British war hero and former member of Parliament, who, by the way, also guest lectured during my summer in Holland with Bob. I asked this young professor about this connection. The young professor was shocked and sputtered out, "You must know Bob Bartel." Indeed, I did. It was an honor. He left an indelible mark on me. I will always be in his debt. I hold in my glass a metaphorical glass of water. The water comes to the halfway point. It is not half empty. It is not half full. It is full, which is what Bob would have said. Bob, this metaphorical glass symbolizes the living waters that Christ promised his followers. Bob is not drinking from living waters with his missionary parents and friends and loved ones. I lift up this glass in thankfulness and in joy and remembrance. Thank you for the impact on my life and that of many others. Good afternoon.